Good morning. My name is Stephen Nolan, Managing Director of the UN-convened Financial Centres for Sustainability. I'm also the Chairman of this year's Climate Finance Week Ireland. At just under 6 million social media impressions and with several thousand virtual attendees, we are now into the 4th day of this week. Today's theme is talent and innovation. I want to thank the Sustainable Finance Skillnet for supporting today's proceedings. Our first session is supporting product development, the convergence of digital, technology and the climate action agenda. It is organised in association with the Green Digital Finance Alliance and the Fintech and Payments Association of Ireland. I will now hand over to Michael, the head of FPAI, to begin this session. Michael.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We're delighted to be part of today's session. The title, Supporting Product Development, the Convergence of Digital Technology and the Climate Action Agenda. That's a very long title, but don't worry, I'll be handing over to some super panelists who will shine some light and bring some insight into the subject, or maybe shine some green light onto the subject. My name is Michael Concannon, and I work with the Fintech and Payments Association of Ireland, otherwise known as the FPAI. We are a trade organisation, and we represent a broad church of companies and individuals interested in the subject of fintech. Our membership is broad as well, and it includes domestic and international banks, big techs and little techs, peer organisations in other countries, and of course fintechs of all shapes and sizes. We also work with many partner organisations such as Enterprise Ireland and IDA, who you're very familiar with, and as Stephen has mentioned, on this occasion, the Green Digital Finance Alliance. In fact, we'll be meeting 2 of our fintech members in a few minutes. One that can legitimately claim to be one of Ireland's oldest fintechs, long before the term fintech was ever invented, Fexco, Grace Gilligan, delighted to have her here. And the other is Thomas Russell from Think, Evolve, Solve, which is a more recent example of a fintech, but is actually leading the way when it comes to specifically designing products with sustainable finance legislation in mind. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them in a few minutes. It is the case that the FPAI shares a roof with the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland, which represents domestic banks, and FEBI, which represents the international banks here in Ireland. And that's fantastic for us, as it gives us opportunity to work together on items of common good. And it is on that note of the common good that sustainable finance has in fact become the major and shared focal point. In fact, the BPFI conducted a survey of its members recently and asked participants to identify the single most important issue for them as we look towards 2022. Now, traditionally, the answer to such a question would have been regulations or AML or open banking, cyber, talents, government policy, whatever. But this year, the number 1 item identified by some margin was sustainable finance. This is actually an appropriate juncture to say thanks to my colleague in BPFI who heads up the sustainable finance team, Louise O'Mahony. She's been knocking it out of the park in this area recently, and she's been great for sharing her expertise and her network to help us bring banks and fintechs together to find solutions in this area. Of course, it's already the case that sustainable finance legislation is applying to banks, and they're being forced to make changes to their systems and processes and products. And in achieving compliance, something that we've noticed recently, and we think is an interesting development, is that the banks seem to be more willing to work with third parties, including fintechs, to source solutions. Now, this view is evidenced by the outcome of another survey that we did a few months ago, when we got the heads of innovation and the heads of product and the heads of digitization at the retail banks. And we asked them to tell us, look, what are you doing with fintechs? What levels of engagement do you have with them? And we were surprised, in a very pleasant way, I should add, to see that they had, over the last 5 years, spent some 400 million euros innovating and collaborating with the fintechs who brought along the latest technologies. Those engagements were spread across, I think, about 100 fintech firms, and over 1/3 of those were Irish firms. And interestingly, much of that activity was in the form of commercial product purchase, which gave rise to recurring cash flows running into tens of millions per annum. Now, one of the main reasons that the banks cited for engaging with fintechs was to develop new products faster and more effectively than they could have developed in-house. Now, the nature of this activity demonstrates what is apparent now, a willingness by the banks to look outside their own organisations when they look to innovate. And I have worked in financial services for many years, and I've seen that banks would be sceptical of engaging with third parties. But the survey results show that they are in fact willing to engage with fintechs, especially where those fintechs can bring faster solutions and more effective solutions than they could do themselves. Now, for fintechs, we think this is really important because this shift presents potential opportunities to work with the incumbent financial institutions, especially in the burgeoning area of sustainable finance. The fintechs, the banks recognize, bring unique expertise in niche and specialized areas of technology, and it makes them very attractive to the banks to enhance their products and services. And it is specifically to that intersection between banks, fintechs, and sustainable finance that the FBAI has decided to launch a dedicated sustainable finance working group. This group will have representation from across the industry, and we're going to start with some very simple objectives. Number one, we want to raise awareness of the subject of sustainable finance amongst the entire sector, but particularly with the fintechs. In doing so, we're going to tap into the existing experience and expertise that the banks have to share the message, which Louise will again be helping with. Thank you very much. We hope to share information and insight amongst all the stakeholders into the emerging legislation and the taxonomy that's coming up in this area, because obviously that will drive much of the sustainable finance agenda. We'll also bring groups together to share information and insight into the new technologies that can assist sustainable finance. And in that regard, we hear a lot of talk about data. And in that space, we'll hear about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we'll hear more from the panel on that later. But perhaps most importantly, the last objective that we have is to bring banks and fintechs together in a non-competitive setting to seek opportunity to work together to solve common problems, tapping into the willingness that the banks are showing to engage with fintechs. Now, ultimately, what we'd like to do with this group is to foster trials and proofs of concept and other collaborations amongst the financial services industry. And in that regard, we're in discussions with the Grand Canal Innovation District, headed up by TCD, which is seeking to bring together financial services, technology, and academia together to work on common solutions. So we're looking forward to working with them. Now, instrumental in driving the formation and helping to lead this new working group is Laura Flood, who's a partner in PwC and also a board member on the Fintech and Payments Association of Ireland. And Laura has played a stellar role in putting sustainable finance front and central in the financial services industry, and I just want to take this opportunity to acknowledge and express thanks for her efforts, which is the perfect segue for me to hand over now to Laura, who will moderate our panel discussion. Laura.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for that lovely introduction. So good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Flood. As Michael said, I'm a banking partner in PwC, and I'm very much looking forward to chairing the session this morning. I mean, at PwC, this is something that's top of mind for our clients. You know, they want to talk about a strategy perspective, you know, what should I be doing, reporting perspective, what should I be telling my stakeholders, and then implementation, I suppose, how do I build all this into my business? So it's certainly a very exciting time for us as we work with our clients on this agenda. I'm also a board member of the FPI, as Michael said. I'd like to, I suppose, reciprocate the thanks in terms of the engagement that we've had on this subject, and it's certainly something that we want to continue to do, and we're really looking forward to seeing the outcome of the innovation working group on the ESG side as we work through it. So I suppose it's not about me. We've a great panel session that we're going to line up for now. So I suppose we'll just kick off. Sean, I suppose thanks for having us in this wonderful setting today.
Welcome to AIB.
And you know, you guys are really leading the agenda here in Ireland from a financial services perspective, which is great. I suppose this week as well, testament to that. I suppose, can you tell us a bit more about how you guys are looking at the opportunities and challenges, and also, you know, I suppose, a bit about yourself and your role?
Yeah, okay, so probably just a little bit about me. I've been in technology probably for over 30 years. Doesn't seem like it now, but yeah, I've started off mainly actually in the fintech sector, which wasn't called the fintech sector at the time. So I actually spent most of my career there, and you know, then I have a couple of stints with the bank where I, in effect, so my background is really technology and digital product management, if I was to describe it that way. So I've probably got a bit of a kind of a graph for both sides. From an AIB perspective, as Chief Digital Officer, like the ESG agenda is actually, and digital fits together very, very well. And so if you think about it, like digital tended to always have more of a focus on the customer. And realistically, that's where, you know, as Colin has really taken us, that, you know, ESG is really a central focus for nowadays. So we tend to think of it from a customer perspective and a customer lens. We need to bring products and services to market that are appropriate for the customers. So whether that's, you know, kind of, you know, sustainable finance, lending that's in that space that actually customers want, whether that's personal lending for buying their electric vehicle, whether it's for their new, you know, kind of sustainable house, or whether it's part of their retrofit, or whether it's part of a business, their transition finance, or, kind of a new investment. So we've been involved across all of those, and AIB panelists would have spoken about that all week, and that's been a really, really successful area. If you think of other areas where digital is critical, we have a very large, diverse base of stakeholders. So transparency is actually key. So how we report, even if you think of as I mentioned, some of those products that we now have in the sustainability space, how do we make sure the use of proceeds are correct, they're done the right way? But how do we do that kind of what could be quite a clunky process in quite a streamlined manner? Really, digital is where it's at for that. In terms of the reporting, the risk model. So transparency is probably a really, really critical piece. So digital, and actually my data colleagues are really, really plugged in. So for them, that's a massive, massive piece of the infrastructure. So the credit risk modeling, but even the insights that are coming in there. Again, back to probably to my own home turf, resilience. So a resilient infrastructure as we move to digital, and we can see it nowadays. Anytime, I remember back when AIB has been involved in digital. If you think, in 1997, we launched online banking. In 1997, Google didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist. So digital isn't something new for us, it's something, but it's a long journey. And in those days, if something went down, it was fine, it was a nice to have. Not anymore, we've moved on. When we've got a blip now, it really, really impacts people, it impacts our customers. So building resilient infrastructures, where I know Michael talked about it, like the fintech interaction, the third parties that we rely on. Realistically, we're a small European bank. Our reliance on that infrastructure is critical, and what our third parties bring to the table. So that for us is a major challenge. So again, getting the right partners, having resilient solutions, having backup solutions, having fallbacks, that's a real challenge if I was to be very honest. But probably the last bit I'll touch on is that I would say probably for most of our career, we would have digital was always it was seen as a better, faster, cheaper. It's a race to the bottom. It's a way of cutting costs. It's quite the opposite. For me, digital has been a long, as I mentioned, costly, like this huge investment has gone into it. But it's been a journey to standardization and transparency and actually giving a better quality of service. So we think the consistency that digital brings is the bit that transforms it. So for AIB, we see the level of reporting, the expectations of our customers and our stakeholders. There is only one way to meet that, and that is to be more digital. But we need to do it in a way that's more inclusive. Digital has traditionally been, do the biggest problem. Let's solve the biggest problem because there's 2 million customers who log in every day. Let's focus on them. But actually, it's not about just them. There's still 30% of our customers that aren't really digital. So how do we build solutions for those? For us, I think the next phase is around the digital inclusion side. So they're probably all the aspects. So
great,
yeah.
Thank you. Thomas, over to you next. I suppose you joined our last FPI event as a panelist, and you've been working very much in this space since then, which is over a year ago at this stage. So I suppose interested to hear more about how you're getting on, and I suppose an intro, for those who missed our last session, as to what you guys do and what you're working on at the moment, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. I'm delighted to be here again. This is a really, really important topic overall. I think, for fintechs and regtechs, we're the kind of leaders in this small space of trying to develop stuff out. And so I suppose a little bit of my personal journey might help people to understand where we are at now. So I'm the youngest of 6 from a farm in Tipperary, so used to being out and about. I went and did a physics degree in UL. I went to Accenture, worked there for a number of years, worked with an NGO in India for a period of time. I then worked in a startup world in a private higher education. Brilliant experience there. And then I kind of led on to, back in 2012, we set up Think, Evolve, Solve, a data firm effectively. I suppose we were really, really excited, right? Data is on the horizon, it's got loads of opportunities. There's the AI, the machine learning, all the exciting stuff that you can see can happen. And I guess we wanted to help companies achieve that. And when you get into the trenches, there's a practicality that kicks in very, very quickly, actually. And that practicality is really around how long it takes to run these projects. They're often more complex than people expect. There's lots of stakeholders. To a large extent, there's been technology gaps as well in data space that have made it quite difficult. And then there's kind of a nuance to data projects and even to digitization, I think, as people have matured into it, in that you don't just build a solution and run a project and deploy something. It actually evolves and innovates as it's deployed. There's a long tail to that process. And when you put data in that loop, you've got to remain competitive with data. Data that you might use 2 years ago has evolved, actually. the data sources available to you have evolved. So you need to factor those in, and that creates a lot of challenges, and those challenges are quite material. They're material in the respect of the number of stakeholders that you have to manage, the complexity of managing those stakeholders, the level of change and innovation that you need to deliver and be resilient on. You can't just actually apply change, and it has to be a very resilient process, and that's complex in the data landscape. So I suppose for us, that was, in setting up the company, getting 2 feet into that practical world, we learned an awful lot very, very quickly. And one of the things that we looked to do and to kind of address those challenges, and I think we characterized them as 2 driving factors, right? There's 2 fundamental variables, excuse the physics kind of link back, that are driving this. The number of data sources you have to work with, that's increasing at a phenomenal rate, actually. You'd be surprised how much data goes into, or sources of data that go into even a single data set that you're trying to work with. And also the rate of which you need to play with that, temper that, change that, evolve that, so it presents a really valuable product that can continue to evolve. Now, what we saw, and I think it's really interesting actually, we're seeing this transfer, like those problem statements, excuse me, largely exist have been solved already in the physical world, actually. And in the physical world, it's solved under supply chain management. Those principles are applied there, where you've lots of suppliers, you've lots of complexity, you've got target dates that you need information or products by. That's a really, really interesting space. And what we're seeing is a transfer of the physical world of supply chain management principles into the digital world of data management, effectively. And what we're seeing, and actually, to be honest, we're seeing a lot of it arise in the US actually initially at the moment, and starting to come to Europe, but it's the practice of developing data supply chain management effectively as an overall expertise within a firm, and to dedicated to data supply chain management roles within the organization. And I suppose for us, one of the things we saw that opportunity, because we were in the trenches, we were solving it for our clients, and in that context, we built a product which is called Gather 360. And it's effectively a data supply chain management tool. And what it does is it really brings all those principles from the physical supply chain management and those benefits of being able to have very clear visibility, manage change quite dynamically, really cope with that growing need of data sources. And that's presented kind of huge opportunities, because now we get back to the hopeful piece at the start, the AI, the machine learning, all the applications that can bring. And especially on the kind of green agenda, the need for change there is, the speed of the need for change in this space is phenomenal. We don't really have much time here, guys. That's the whole, I think, the narrative that's out there, and it's very critical. So we need to be able to get that information in the format that we need, in the structure that we need, in a way that we can power these AI tools, machine learning, and data services around that digitize, I think it's a great word, Sean, you standardize the process, so that we get clarity, that we can provide the information and evidence to business owners and company owners to be able to make the right decisions. Because I think fundamentally, people want to make the right decisions, but they need the information at hand to do that. And then for the ecosystem around that to support that. For us, we took that supply chain approach that we've used with our clients today, and we set up, I think this is tying back to our last workshop, we kicked off an innovation lab to do some research on the sustainable finance area. It was quite, our ESG overall actually, it was quite immature, to be honest, and that's like 18 months ago. It's still starting to take shape, but I think the opportunity that is presented for us, we specifically went after, can we solve something specific here? And there's a regulatory requirement around SFDR reporting. So we've gone and done that. We've built a solution that runs on our data product that runs using our Gather 360 platform effectively. And we're delighted to say we'll be launching that at the end of this month effectively. So, and it brings really step changes in terms of not only the, I suppose, response to that requirement and the cost and all the overhead that goes with that, but also we're using it as a vehicle to showcase what the opportunities that exist behind supply chain management as an approach, and what that brings to the table. So really excited about all that kind of stuff. We're doing some other stuff on the ESG front around carbon calculations for companies. really focusing on companies and saying they're looking to get carbon neutral over a 3, 4, 5 year period, but that means they need to gather an enormous amount of information across their organization to do that, and we're hoping to give them tools to be able to do that in an accelerated way. So
that's brilliant. Thanks for that, Thomas. And Grace, over to another, I suppose, technology being applied live. So Grace, you work with Fexco. I mean, interested to hear a bit more about you and your role there. And I know that Fexco recently brought a product to market specifically focused on the ESG space. So if you could share some more information with us on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and thanks for the opportunity to be here this morning. I'm Grace Gilligan. I'm currently Head of Credit for Fexco Asset Finance, and I'm representing Fexco Group of Companies this morning. Fexco is an Irish-based financial services and fintech company with it's headquartered in Cloglan in Kerry, and it has probably 2,500 employees over 29 countries, so a good global reach. In relation to, I suppose, Fexco's approach to the ESG agenda, I think they see it as full of opportunities, particularly in considering their strength in foreign payments and their data technology. And given the topic this morning in relation to product development, they've got a great, I suppose, live example of product development and the opportunities and that convergence between digital technology and the climate agenda. So Fexco, in conjunction with Avocet, have developed a product called PACE. And PACE stands for Platform for Analysing Carbon Emissions. It's focused initially on the aviation industry, and it came out of them recognising, I suppose, a problem that companies had to solve. And Thomas touched on it there in relation to the carbon emissions and data. So this is expected to be a benchmark for analysing and forecasting carbon emissions, initially in the aviation sector. One of the problems that that companies talk about a lot is trying to get the data and also trying to compare like with like. So what this does, it takes in information from a lot of different places, and it can give you analysis of your carbon emissions on a portfolio basis. It can do aircraft, it can do airline, it can even give you information based on seat configuration, which is great information to have. It not only does that, part of what companies need to do and what this product does is that it allows you to have accountable information for ESG reporting. And when you consider the aviation, like a lot of other companies now, is becoming more regulated and you need more information, it's a great tool to have. And when you look, I suppose, from carbon emissions and the aviation industry, you've got a lot of, you've got emissions and you've got emission credits, and you're looking at over a number of jurisdictions. So this is also, I suppose, a risk management tool that it can keep track of those emissions, it can keep track of those credits. It can tell you, when you're getting near, how much it might cost to go somewhere else. And then with all that information and the reporting, it can work as a what-if scenario. So if somebody is looking at, well, will I buy this aircraft? What will I do? It can give you that information. And then on top of that, everything sort of links together, that it's a great due diligence tool. So if you consider that a lessor might be looking at taking on an aircraft, insurers might be looking at, well, what's the risk here? Or investors are looking at putting money into the area, then they have accountable information, which again, they looked at what problem need to be solved, and they worked with them to solve that problem. And this, while it's initially out in the aviation sector, this can be worked out to maritime and down to other sectors as well. Right. So it's a fantastic example, I think, of the opportunities that's in fintech around the climate agenda.
No, absolutely, Grace. That's super. I suppose, Mark, over to you. I mean, Thomas and Grace have outlined two really good examples, but I mean, we're going to need a lot of skills to address this agenda. So I suppose in your role as Chief Technologist for SkillNet, interested to hear a bit more about that, but also I suppose the range of services and I suppose, an opportunity that you provide to your clients through the work that you do.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Just to introduce myself, my name is Mark Jordan. I'm the Chief Technologist at Skillnet Ireland, with responsibility for how we deliver talent solutions into the technology sector, but also the overall strategic roadmap for the organisation, and how we support sectors across Ireland, across all multiple industries. Prior to that, I have a history of financial services, in particular fintech and investment banking, so I know a little bit about the subject matter today. I think at the core for Skillnet Ireland, we are looking to advance innovation, productivity and success within companies here in Ireland, and we do that through close collaboration and ultimately through the delivery of talent solutions to the leaders of organizations and the wider workforce. And again, we're operating across multiple sectors. We work with 57 different industry associations here, so we have tentacles across industry in every corner of the country and within every type of business. Ranging from the micro size all the way up to the largest multinationals. I think that for us, it's key that we have close engagement around some of the really key topics that challenge industry, and those are around things like digitalization. There's obviously around climate and the challenges that brings, around how we get SME leaders to be to come on the journey with us, and obviously how we protect the integrity of the internationalization of business, both inbound and outbound here in Ireland. So we have a vision for that kind of strategy and the way that we apply ourselves. And for this particular topic, we find that there are 7 specific themes that when we consult with industry around the challenges of climate finance, this is what comes back to us, and this is what we're reacting to right now, which is part of the conversation today. And I'll just list them for you. The first one is the ability for organizations to develop and formulate a strategy around climate, how they'll engage from a financial perspective. Secondly, for the sell-side organizations is the issuance and distribution of products that relate to that kind of relate to climate finance specifically. Thirdly is around accessibility platforms for investors and the way they're marketed. I think that's obviously key, and we're finding there's a lot of skills demand there. Fourthly is around data and performance disclosure, which will obviously be key as we talk later about regulation, the changes there. Next is around risk assessment, specifically for climate risk and how to derive risk metrics there. And then, the last 2 is regulation and compliance will obviously be very, very key. And then the offering out to investor services, specifically around education on the type of instruments that are being issued, the types of products, the types of vehicles that are available for investment. And so collectively, that's where we are, and we're looking at developing and delivering with our partners talent solutions that address those challenges.
Great, thank you for that. So I suppose one of the things that we, the FPI, see is a huge opportunity for collaboration between fintechs and I suppose established financial services. So Sean, just to ask you, in terms of the problem identification or coming up with a problem statement, AIB is facing an ever increasing range of expectations. Sorry, you and every other financial services institution are facing an ever increasing range of expectations from stakeholders. So that's everything from shareholders, customers, investors, and your people as well. I suppose what types of challenges can you give to us that people could start thinking about?
Absolutely. I probably haven't got enough time to list them all, but I think there's probably a few very, very clear areas. And I'll give you a really simple example. If you take something like our personal green loan at the moment, as part of that process to make sure we use the funds and the funds are used correctly, there's a process by which you have to what are you using the funds for? You have to provide a quote, It's all uploaded in the app. It's fine, but it's manually validated. That's just at the personal level. Like, that's quite a clunky journey for us, for the customers. It's probably not that transparent, and the data collected is a little bit, it's a quote, so can you really stand over it? And as the regulation increases, is that appropriate? So, like, I don't think AIB is ever going to crack that issue, but actually there's probably people who understand the supply chain, as Thomas might have mentioned, or other areas. That's probably, and that's only a small example. And then if you expand that out into the SME space and into the corporate space, very, very similar problem statement. If you think about where we have to look at our book and try and score and rate, as we look in terms of physical risk, for example, so if we look at our mortgage book, how do we score that effectively and dynamically? We probably have B or BER certificates for a percentage of our book. We don't have it for all our book because historically it wasn't a requirement. How do we get BER certs? How do we get at an air code level, for example? That's a real challenge. Again, would AIB solve that problem on its own? No. Is it something that if there was a data source that provided that, would we use it? Absolutely we would. Then if you go into things like, kind of transition risk, and again, looking at our book again, 50% of it in the mortgage space, but 50% across a whole variety of other sectors. As transition risk changes, if, carbon taxes change, how do we model what that is? Again, we're not going to be alone doing that. But if we have to rely on our own analytics and data team, who are very skilled, but actually a lot of that heavy lifting might be done at a kind of at an industry level. So there's probably an opportunity there. If I then think about resilience and inclusion and those topics, I think about, for example, security is a big challenge. Cybersecurity, we're all aware of it. Like, every day you get another smishing or a vishing or that kind of stuff. That's just as important and just as credible, and it's to build that trust in our payments and our digital infrastructures. That's an area where we're trying to run very fast. The fraudsters are running very, very fast as well. And again, collectively we need to solve that. So it's even interesting, we did a discussion last week with a couple of the fintechs that we work with in terms of how they might help us close some of those gaps. That's probably one other area. There's many, many, many areas, and and I've probably forgotten about another half a dozen there as well.
No, they certainly all sound very familiar. I think, Thomas, if I could just go over to you next, I suppose it's a subject that we often talk about. I suppose collaboration between banks and fintechs, and one where we generally get a good debate. So, from your perspective, is this an agenda that you found, I suppose, particularly easy to link in with financial institutions on, or how can we best set ourselves up for best collaboration? I suppose, as Sean said, we need to work together on this one. So I suppose, what from your perspective, or I feel you're going to tell me a story there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It is definitely interesting. I suppose it's kind of like the elephant in the mouse a little bit, especially for startups and smaller fintech firms. You're dealing with an elephant, and it's a different kind of conversation. And there's a lot to be learned, and I think it's a two-sided piece of learning. I think there's a lot I could share actually about how to maybe connect in properly. I think associations like this are brilliant for this actually, to create that forum, because I think there's a lot of speed of innovation in those fintechs and regtechs. They just think in a different gear, and they're looking at the problem from a different perspective. But you also need to ensure you can communicate that perspective in a way that's anchored with the big organizations. In all honesty, if you make it sound too theoretical, if you can't anchor it off a problem statement, like, it's great to hear the personal green loan. I could talk to you all day about a couple of options and how you could solve that. But honestly, I'm probably not the best answer for all of that. It's actually somebody who has domain expertise as well. So it's linking in with somebody on your team and getting the right understanding of the business problem, because really, fintech, regtech, these are about solving business problems. And if I was to say anything to people getting into fintech and regtech, I have a physics degree, so I'm science background. I have some tech and all that good stuff, but they're problems to be solved. And often leaders who are in the banks, and even people who work in banks, they can be really good fintech, regtech operators. Technology is out there to help them solve it, but a lot of the time there's a domain gap there between understanding the problem statement and back, I guess. But for us, I think forums and planned forums, I think, to connect in a more, I suppose, open conversation basis with the larger institutions is important, because I've been on calls and I've been in the experience, which is I have this problem, can you solve it? And I'm like, well, actually, we're fundamentally changing how you look at this problem in the first place. No, I have this problem and this is what I need to solve. And you don't get into the conversation, which is step 2 feet back and you can move 10 feet forward, because it's incremental what they're looking at from a change point of view. Now that's a challenge I'd put to institutions. I won't name who that was or whatever in terms of conversations, but I learned from that conversation actually about how to talk and how to communicate effectively so that we can get a conversation going in the right way. But it is something to maybe bring to larger institutions, that it's not all on the mouse to get the communication right. We actually have huge advantage to give you guys, and there's a way of reaching out in the right way that actually you'll learn an awful lot, and maybe it's not that specific solution or opportunity, but often you'll get an innovative perspective that can just change how they look at the problem in the first place.
Okay, great. Well, let's give an institution a chance to respond. So, Sean, we're going to have people, I suppose, we expect to see a lot of development in this area. People are going to want to come to talk to you about the problems that you need to solve. I suppose it is very much a two-sided story. So, if you'd like to give us maybe some insights as to how best to maybe approach that conversation.
So it's an interest. The elephant in the mouse is an interesting kind of way of describing it. Probably what I would say is I've spent more of my career as a mouse than I have as an elephant. So I spent 18 years as a mouse and probably around 11 years as an elephant. So I'm probably a bit divided, but I totally agree. It's all about the problem statement. Like, I would say I've had very good engagements and very poor engagements. You get people come in and either they think they have some cool technology, and to be honest, what I would say is that people think as Chief Digital Officer, you must be all about the technology. I'm absolutely not about the technology. I couldn't be more. Like, I was a technologist, I left it. And the reason I left it earlier in my career is because it didn't interest me. I got interested by how do you solve problems that people want solved. It's a bit like kind of this fascination with blockchain. Blockchain's a great technology. Like, if I go back, it was digital certificates in Baltimore was supposed to change the world. Digital certificates are fantastic technology, but the customers aren't aware of them. They solved a problem under the hood. That's what it needs to be about. It needs to be all about the problem statement. The other thing I would say actually is engage early and often. Like, that's the bit I find. People come in and they think they have to have a perfect solution and that I have to solve all your problem and it has to be proven and established and working. Actually, and it was funny, I was talking to my son's in college, and we were talking about the other day, and he'd been reaching out as part of his project, and he'd called a professor, and he was only too happy to give him an interview. He's been studying to be a journalist. And I said exactly the same, like, where people say, I'm doing it, my son or my daughter or my cousin or my auntie are doing a thesis on something to do digitization, would you meet them for a coffee? Every time. You'd happily do it. But when you get emails in from vendors, it's kind of, oh God, I'm too busy to engage. I think really, whereas if they say, actually, we want to tease out a problem statement, I want to understand your problem statements, that bit actually energizes us, because I think that's the bit. If we think, you see this, you're now in the sale, we're in the sales pipeline, you've got 6 months to close this deal, that's probably not the best place to start. Whereas actually, if you're coming in early and say, look, here's the problem statement as we see it, what's your perspective on it? And we've done actually quite a bit of that over the years, so it's changed a lot. There was a time when the biggest IT team and a competition, in all the markets I worked in, was actually the banks. That's completely changed nowadays. We don't have the biggest IT teams anymore. We're challenging, we're reliant on a huge amount on partners. So I would say engage often, use the FPI, use other links, because I give some examples of fintechs where I've personally even spoken to them and given them feedback and said, that bit's really interesting, that bit really isn't that interesting, and actually that might sound like a cool technology, but actually, have you thought about how you'd operationalize that? You can't do that. Or the regulation, for example, if people said, oh yeah, here's a way that you could now, aggressively push credit to people. I'm going, under regulation, I can't do that, so it might be a really cool use of technology. It's not appropriate in the Irish market. So it's probably trying to get those various balances. But I would say engage. Engage is probably the key thing, I would say.
Yeah, so that certainly sounds very promising, Sean, in terms of your future engagement. So thank you for that. I think we have seen, a meaningful shift in terms of that dynamic over the last number of years through the FPI as well. So, I suppose thanks to all for your continued collaboration and looking forward to lots more by the sounds of it. So just a slight change of pace. So Grace, to flip to you for a minute, I suppose, what do you see as some of the key, drivers of opportunity for, as digital technology and the climate kind of change agenda are really converging at this point of a problem statement that needs to be solved with, I suppose, new technology. I mean, where are the key areas that you see, I suppose, potential for deployment?
Yeah, well, certainly I think the potential is huge. When you consider that if you solve a problem for one company, you've probably solved it for another companies, a number of companies, not only in Ireland but worldwide. So no matter where you are, you have an immediate, most likely you have an immediate scalable product. So that's very exciting, I think, for any company. Where the opportunities are coming from, I mean, I think we've all mentioned data this morning, and I think the management of data, the assisting companies to solve the problem of how do they get to their baseline, and then how do they have, I suppose, credible information and to be able to make informed decisions as to how they get from their baseline to their next level. The other driver, I think, and I'd be more focused to a certain extent from my banking background, is from the regulation and reporting. So if you consider that the European Commission are looking at implementing the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So what that's going to do is it's going to move from 11,000 companies requiring to be reporting to nearly 50,000. So you're going to have a much bigger market that's looking to get a problem solved, to get to do that reporting. And on the back of that, then one of the main frameworks for doing that is TCFD. Now, TCFD, one of the things for that is you have to look inward and you have to look outward. So again, you have to look at a lot of information as to what your company is doing, and then what is your company doing outside of that from your scope 3s. And the TCFD also provides for scenario analysis. Most companies won't be able to do that. They need information like Tom's company to provide them with the information to do that. So I think those two certainly are main opportunities. And when the reporting comes in, when you consider that the cost of non-compliance of that, be it from financial fines or even more so from reputational risk of saying you're going to do something and you don't do it, companies will be very focused on getting solutions to that. And if you have a solution to that, then they'll certainly be listening to it. And I think from Sean's point, it's very important that if you think you have the product that solves that problem, you need to talk to the end user, and don't do it at the end of the process, do it at the start, and that's the collaboration bit.
Grace, I think that's great advice for people, and I think reporting is something that all of our clients want to talk to us about, so it's certainly top of mind at the moment for those who are coming into scope for CSRD. I mean, it's not an insignificant challenge that needs to be dealt with in the very near future, to be honest. So I suppose, Mark, interested in your view, I suppose you're Chief Technologist for SkillNet. I suppose, what do you think some of the opportunities are?
I think from a technology standpoint, the opportunities are similar and aligned perfectly with the wider financial services sector. I think data is key for climate finance. Those types of instruments, it's going to be incredibly important that for the creation of ratings, indices, and benchmarking purposes. I think that obviously AI plays a role, just as it does around cost saving, efficiency mechanisms, rationalizing operational processes. Blockchain will be important from a transactional management perspective. I do see from an investor distribution standpoint, I do see the emergence of some of these robo-advisors that are traditionally used for mutual funds and collective investments, mainly in the US and the UK, becoming more prevalent again around accessibility. And I think that all of this is obviously governed by regulation and some of the challenges there. But I think technology plays a role in streamlining the way these products are created and delivered to the marketplace.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And then Thomas, just to bounce back to you, you've mentioned supply chain approach before. I mean, will that help us solve our ESG problem?
Look, to be honest, we're very excited by it. We're seeing a lot of kind of progress and conversation really building up now in probably the early market, which is always the US, who tends to lead this kind of context, where they're seeing a step change in probably what data means actually, because you can have data, but if you don't have provenance and you don't have a story, you can't quality assure it. You might be able to provide some insight in the dashboard to set some direction, but you can't build a product. It's not sustainable. So that context and that challenge and that supply chain challenge, like, you know, in terms of TCFD, in terms of, you know, scope 1, scope 2, internally, externally, trying to get all that information from a supply chain perspective on a very internal basis. And we're not a big company, but we're doing work to understand what is our carbon footprint. And it's really interesting trying to do that work. And when we do that, we need to demonstrate, well, we're making these decisions on this information, and this information was quality assured in the following ways. It's not okay to say disinformation, which I can't really tell you the story behind it. And I kind of bring that up because greenwashing has been a fundamental problem. And it's created a lot of damage actually, because the perception is that it's all okay, and the reality is it isn't. And that affects leadership, right? So I think leaders in a room, an executive board, are trying to make decisions, and fundamentally, I would argue people who are in those leadership positions are trying to do the right thing. So the information they're fed is key, actually. So getting control over that, really excited about the supply chain stuff. We've had some great success. You know, TES is Stigval Solve as a firm. We've been able to implement that across nearly all our clients at this stage, and it makes a significant difference. And we're really excited now about bringing that product out to kind of a more open basis. Because that supply chain approach, I'm going to call it an approach. We have a technology for it. I think we're in great position for it. That's all really good. And you know, we'd advise anyone who's trying to get control and source data to talk to us. But fundamentally, supply chain management principles are really, really valuable for this problem statement. It actually, you know, come back to the physics piece, we've mapped it out. This does not compute with the scaling number of data sources. You cannot pay for it. And how you actually end up paying for it is you might put money in, but you're going to kill your quality.
Yeah.
So it becomes a tractable problem. But
that's very fair. And I suppose just a follow-on question for you, and then I'll go back to Grace. I'd be equally interested in her perspective. I mean, as someone who's built something from scratch, as it were, related to ESG specifically, I mean, what would you recommend to somebody in terms of the process? What are your war wounds that you have from the journey?
Working group. Get industry involved straight away. Get the problem statement right that you're trying to do. ESG is huge. It's from the customer to the company to the investment manager to the investors at the other end. So there's a whole cycle of players involved. Talk to them, understand their challenge today, because I think there's a piece where companies often step in, and maybe Sean, you might see this as well, where they've the iPhone in 1991. Like, we're not ready for the iPhone in 1991. We need the next step to move us forward. So often, and I've been at fault of this myself, I'll be honest, where you think too far ahead without having connected in with your target customer. So I would just talk to work group, let them drive your agenda, and then bring your skills to solve the problem.
Okay. Grace, I'll come to you in a moment, but Sean, you've been brought in there by reference, so I might as well give you a chance to respond on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very fair point. I think, and it's funny, I was actually we're rolling at SCA at the moment. It's a new kind of authentication standard, and even just that example, the iPhone version, like, we were just called listening just to see what kind of complaints customers had, and it was exactly that problem. It was a customer who basically said, I'm trying to buy a Ryanair flight to go to Poland for my holidays with my wife, but actually I have a basic laptop. I don't have a smartphone. I don't really use that technology. So it's often like the expectation is that, everybody is at this level. They're not. Like, it's a very diverse base of customers, and you have to design solutions that are appropriate, for the capability it's kind of the inclusion point I talked about earlier on. It's actually that the bar is quite diverse, so we need to be bringing everyone with us, because there was a time when you could focus on the next big one, but we can't really. We actually need to be, it's more an inclusive challenge, I think, nowadays.
Oh, perfect. Thanks for that, Grace. So in terms of the build, I suppose, what would you recommend, I suppose, or not recommend, as the case is, to people looking at getting into this space?
Yeah, well, I think you do need to look at what problem are you trying to solve. And I think that goes with what Thomas and Sean were saying. And also, is it scalable? Can you use it across other companies and sectors? Certainly, you need to talk to the end user to make sure that the problem you think needs to be solved is actually the problem that they want solved. And then again, it's collaboration and it's partnership. People aren't going to be able to do this by themselves. You need to work with somebody because it covers off across so many different areas of any business, either supply chain or product development, that you do need to collaborate, I think, and you do need to go in partnership, but you do need to talk to the end user to make sure that, the iPhone again, that if you may think you know the problem that needs to be solved, but you need to talk.
Great, thank you. And I suppose time has flown, so we're down to our last question. I actually can't believe it. So, I mean, earlier this week, we saw the launch of the roadmap for Ireland from a sustainable finance perspective, which is great. And congratulations to Stephen and team for getting that out. I mean, I was part of the data and innovation, group that fed through to that. And I suppose the engagement was huge. I suppose the opportunity and the challenge in this space are both immense. So I suppose we'd like to go, Grace, I'll start with you just in terms of, what do you think is critical for Ireland's success, I suppose, as a centre of excellence or an international centre for sustainable finance?
Well, I think building the skills, and I certainly think the SkillNet plays an important part of that, and I have benefited from that so far. And that I did, in conjunction with SkillNet and the Sport of Exco, I did the UNEPFI, which is really, it's basically the climate change and TCFD, and looking at the opportunities for banks. And that gave an opportunity to see what was the regulatory requirements. And then I also did the Institute of Bankers, it's the responsible and sustainable finance. And that was great because it gave a different perspective and in relation to what's happening in the world and what are the issues and requirements from companies. And then you also have the Dublin, seems we're with AIB, the Dublin Chamber supported by AIB do a great sustainability programme. So I think the skills and being able to make sure that you have the skills within Ireland so that you can keep that expertise here.
Great, thanks. Mark, she may have somewhat stole your thunder on the skills piece, but...
Yeah, no, it's great, and thank you for mentioning that, Grace. I think, again, pillar one, skills, critical, around, knowledge building for that whole, capacity around good investing, good advisory services, good product development, and being able to structure organizations accordingly. And pillar two around industry capacity, I think, is really key for investor confidence, especially around disclosures, regulation, compliance, etc. Those to me are the big challenges that we're contributing to as an organization, and those are the ones that we're laser focused in on as part of this.
Great, thank you. Sean, over to you.
Yeah, I think building the skills and a kind of a critical mass there. We've good examples in the past where Ireland has flourished at that, whether it's in the kind of the tech sector, the pharma sector. I think we just need to do whatever we can do. I think the roadmap is key as part of that, really to try and really build that. I do also think there's stuff in the standard space that we haven't been as good at in Ireland. I think I've spent a lot of my career working abroad where standards in terms of ecosystems and payments and aggregation, and maybe it's because the markets are bigger, whether there's, feeds or data sets available, you'll get in Europe or you'll get in the UK that just aren't available in Ireland. So I think we need to get better in Ireland in terms of trying to raise our bar on standards and consistency. I think is probably critical as well.
Great, thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, look, I think it'll go back to our Irish strengths as well again, right? This space isn't developed by any means yet globally even, there's a lot of problems we solve, but I think it's making sure the mouse isn't scared of the elephant and vice versa, right? And that we get in a room and we work together, because these are all scalable solutions. These are global opportunities, and this presents the opportunity for Ireland really to lead, with Irish firms leading actually globally on this. And there's I think that, as a country, I suppose from my own perspective, it's interesting when you talk to various peer companies who've built up and maybe gone to the US and built that ecosystem. I'm definitely finding it even through our network now in Dublin and in Ireland, you kind of have what you need to build what you want to do. So you can build globally challenging companies here. And it's really about one of our good strengths, and I suppose COVID hasn't helped us, but being able to get out, have an honest conversation with the elephant and say, hey, you're acting like an elephant, that's not helping me here. And you're going, hey, well, you're not talking anything that makes sense to me. So, but it's that practical way that we converse, I think, will prove a strength. And I think skills-wise in the country, I think, yes, we continue to develop them, but we have a very strong ecosystem of skills at this point. It's now just really about harnessing that. And I think this space, this whole sustainable space fits Ireland. We're a green country. It just fits perfectly. So I'm really excited about it. So
Great. So I suppose thanks everyone for your participation during the panel. I want to say a big thanks to Stephen Nolan on behalf of the FPI for giving us the time and space to speak at this event. I mean, we do feel that, you know, digital technology is going to be a big part of the solution to the big challenges that we face on this. So I'd also like to say thanks to Michael Concannon from the FPI, I suppose our panellists, Grace, Mark, Sean, the elephant, unfortunately now I suspect forever known, and Thomas. So thanks to you all for your insights this morning. It was absolutely great, and I think we leave a lot more enthusiastic about this opportunity than we did when we sat down this morning. So thanks all.
Thanks, Laura.
Grant.